This is the nonlinear optics lab where we have tunable lasers from the visible to terahertz range and timescales from the continuous wave to femtosecond regimes. This is one of our tunable sources. This setup here. Work is done here collaboratively with C-Trace partners, Partha Banerjee, Joe House, Carolyn Hansen, Chi-Wen John, Andrew Sarangan, and others come in here to do a variety of work using these sources.
Husband, father, son, friend, brother, counselor, confidant, scholar, researcher, teacher, trusted advisor, competitor. Yes, he was all of these and many more. He was one of a kind, an individual, a team member, a contributor to all facets of life. We were delighted by his presence, and we are diminished by his absence. Peter is STARS. He was a bright spotlight on technology, art, research, and scholarship. He loved music, art, and lasers, and he loved all that went into those things. As a matter of fact, it was he who told me once that light travels faster than sound. That's why some people appear bright until they speak. He was vocal about the importance of creativity, inventiveness, and innovation. And yes, he practiced all three of these as a matter of course in his time at the University of Dayton. He was one of the first STARS speakers to be selected 5 years ago for the inaugural symposium. On November 19th in 2010, he presented lasers and changing the color of light, and he captured the audience with his passion and energy and his ability to relate the important things about this work to those in the audience not skilled in the field of lasers. He was indeed what STARS is all about. So as we begin our 5th STARS Symposium, it's fitting and right to remember Peter, his life and his contributions, through stories and memories of those who were close to him. And I want to thank you very much for being here.
Those triplets are now in 7th grade, and Peter's son Wayne was a senior in high school, and he's like a clone of Peter, and he's never been as bright. He just recently scored perfect scores on his ACT and his SAT exams, and he's already had an interview at MIT, Peter's alma mater. So, can you hear me in the back? I'm not using that. Peter was truly one of our stars, and for example, he helped put the electro-optics program at the University of Dayton on the map. And in the past year, he was designated a Fellow of the Optical Society of America. Now, for those of you who don't realize, this is really a big deal. He's also the RAND chair. He is a, as has already been mentioned, he won the Research Award for the College of Arts and Sciences. In 2004, he won the Research Award, the Alumni Research Award in 2007. He's a great collaborator, a great mentor. He mentored dozens of undergraduate and graduate students. He's a great colleague. Those of you who were collaborating with him will get a chance to say something about that in a little bit. He was also an author of multiple high-level research papers. He had held several patents. He recently authored a nonlinear optics textbook, which is very well received. As a matter of fact, I taught nonlinear optics a couple times before Peter got here, and I, in my infinite wisdom, picked probably the worst textbook ever written. And I wish I had Peter's book, because I could have done a much better job, and I probably got better reviews. Maybe not. So Peter was truly one of our bright stars. But he had other interests also. As some of you know, he's a skilled bicyclist. I mentioned that in his memorial service, but he was also a cross-country skier of some skill. As a matter of fact, he was a captain of his cross-country ski team in college. But he may not have been the best cross-country skier in the family, because his wife, Deborah, was invited to the Olympic trials in the biathlon. I used to talk to Peter sometimes about some of the interesting jobs he had when he wasn't in school. I mentioned one of them at the memorial service, his turkey carving experience of models. He is also a whitewater rafting guide on the Ottawa River in Canada. And he was so passionate about the commands he shouted to his passengers that he got nicknamed Peter Possessed. He was also, and he's let's see. Oh yeah, he worked at Arapahoe Basin Ski Resort one season where he practiced his downhill skiing, so he's accomplished both in downhill and cross-country skiing. Peter was always came up with innovative solutions to problems. And he told me about one problem that he had when he was in college. It seems like his dorm mates used to like to put their speakers in the window and blast some music out into the outside for everybody to hear whether they wanted to or not. So he decided to counter this by going down to a record store and buying a couple of Bee Gees albums. And he then proceeded to blast Bee Gees music into the quad that evening. He said it worked for a while, but it didn't work for a long time. So not every solution that Peter came up with had a desired outcome. People, as I was chair of the physics department when we hired Peter. And people always would ask me how we could attract someone with Peter's talent and credentials to come to UD. Well, Peter started writing his memoirs when he got sick, mostly for his children. But Deb was gracious enough to share those with me, and I'd like to tell you why Peter came to UD in his own words. There's a section in his memoirs called Why Dayton? And here's what he said. These are Peter's words. I was pretty picky in choosing the schools I applied to. I wanted to go someplace that had an optics program, and I wanted possibles. And the possible schools came down to just a handful. When I visited Dayton for my job interview, I was happy to see a very collaborative faculty and a workplace where there's a balance between research and teaching. Another thing that I liked about Dayton is that the local schools in the area had a good reputation, and the people I spoke to about it were happy with what it was doing for the children. I remember an interview I had in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I asked some questions about the local schools, and all the faculty unanimously agreed that they were terrible. After hearing that, I lost my interest in working there. Moving someplace where I could have a good job and good opportunities for our children really drove our decision to come to Dayton. So maybe we should thank the Oak Ridge school system for helping us. The first person that had contact with Peter, first person from Dayton that had contact with Peter was Perry Amy. And I'd like to ask Perry to come up here and talk to me.
I really enjoyed working with Peter in his early years at UD. He shared many things with me, including his infrared laser system and his frustrations with his situation at the AFRL lab, where he mentored several EO students, graduate students, and basically worked for free. And that was, of course, an issue. But these were days when he was building. Times were starting, it was the beginning of his career, really. When I became emeritus in 2004, I moved out of the large lab at 001, and he took over that lab, and it was a perfect fit. I met Peter while I was on sabbatical at the Combustion Research Institute, which is part of the Sandia National Lab in Livermore, California. I had just arrived in January of 1997, and I heard about a postdoc who was looking for an academic position. As fate would have it, the UD Physics was looking for a new faculty member with EO electro-optics background. One day, shortly after I arrived, I was sitting at a temporary desk, and when this tall, lanky fellow came up to me and introduced himself, and we sat down and started talking about the future. I was pleasantly surprised that Peter did not want to go to a research university. He wanted to go someplace where teaching was part of the lifestyle of an academic. And I assured him physics faculty teach, as well as do research. And that started the ball rolling in his head, as far as I can tell. Of course, this thing about the schools is another important element. I assured him that UD faculty was very supportive of students on a one-on-one basis, both electro-optics and physics. I gave him the usual description of the electro-optics program, the physics department, and the very nice, friendly qualities of the UD campus. When I passed this on to my colleagues at the physics department, they were very surprised and excited about this fellow. And of course, the rest is history, a wonder-filled history that it was. He could have gone to any research university, but he chose us. I became aware of some of the trials that Deb and Peter experienced moving to Dayton. from the wonder world of Northern California with its good fresh vegetables, fruit, seafood, inexpensive good wine. Some of it was adapting to an old house in Oakwood. But there was this experience I had with Peter when I invited him to a UD basketball game. I've had season tickets since the late 60s, and so this was a tradition. My family, my kids, all of them went to UD. They were in the band. And in those days, there was a tradition among many students to go as part of their basketball experience and part of their UD experience. There was a fast food restaurant that was very common. And in fact, my family gets together once or twice a year. We try to have a meal at this restaurant. I spent 15 years in Cincinnati studying engineering and physics. And I grew to appreciate this restaurant because it was founded by a Greek chef. I invited Peter to have dinner with me at this place. Well, Peter was not impressed. In fact, he made some rather critical comments on my choice of food. And he wasn't impressed by the basketball, especially the noisy arena. It was, I guess there was a certain violation of his desire for order. Fortunately, we stayed close despite this excursion into conflicting lifestyles. Oh, by the way, the restaurant is Skyline Chili. Peter was a great friend and colleague. He left us extraordinary legacies, strong research, great teaching, student mentoring, collaboration, and ethics. In short, academic excellence.
Yeah, I wanted to say a few words about Peter as a collaborator. He really embodied the whole spirit of UD collaboration during his time here. A lot of my colleagues will come up and talk. A lot of his colleagues are here. Actually, I'm glad to see people here today, because it really does say something about Peter's reach in the school. He had a lot of students that worked in his lab. I can talk about the undergraduates who over the years have worked with him. And in that respect, there was a program, minority leadership program that Charlie Browning had set up. And many of the students from that program over the years had worked in Peter's lab. He was very careful about bringing them along and helping them to gain insights into research. And he really gave of his time without reserve. The graduate students who worked in his lab were from many different countries. The ones that I'm familiar with, so I don't forget, maybe more, certainly China, Nepal, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Mexico, Israel, and Cameroon. Those are the only ones that I'm aware of, and he really was an international professor. He did not just align himself with work that was, say, at the Air Force Base, but he also did a lot of work at the Air Force Base and had many students there over the years, many of whom are still in the area and working in one way or another with the Air Force Base. So he really had quite an impact on our area. During his illness, and in fact after his death, I received emails, was given condolences by many of his international colleagues from Russia, Japan, China, and Mexico, just to mention a few. They all felt the loss of Peter and valued him as a colleague, and he'll remain in our memory as a shining example of UD collaboration. Thank you.
When I think of Peter, I certainly think of the lab he worked in particular, his pulse laser system, which can give out really, really short pulses with rep rates of the order of tens of megahertz. That would probably translate to about 4 trillion pulses at the time I'll take for this rather short 2-minute tribute. I had contact with Peter off and on from the time I've been at UD, mailing committees. For the first time I came to know him really well was during a trip to Photonics West in 2012. And as you saw from those slides, In that meeting, Peter donned on some funky variable wavelength glasses at the fellows' luncheon, maybe while trying to focus on the fellows' plaque that QM just received. I came to know Peter more professionally when my postdocs, along with me, were doing some characterization on negative index materials in his lab, and that was originally fabricated in Andrew's lab. The experiments were arduous, since we had to observe and measure the phase velocity of light traveling through the material, and deduce that the velocity was in fact negative. Incidentally, my postdoc George had come across this paper that talked about a double interferometric method to do this, and he and I were reading it and contemplating on how to do this on a long journey to Japan for a meeting soon after the killer tsunami hit Sendai. The first time I experienced something like a tsunami was really in Peter's lab soon after, and we admired Peter's prowess in taming it. With his pulse laser and a frequency converter, Peter was able to produce ultra-short pulses in the glue which would be used in our experiment. And this technique was successfully used, and through Peter's help, we in fact verified that we had a negative phase velocity. It was certainly one of the toughest experiments that we had done, and would not have been possible without Peter's constant help and supervision. In ending, I would like to say, since then, Peter and I have talked about many things, from science to the winters in upstate New York where he met Debbie, to the enchanting land of Canada where he was born and brought up. I would like to also say that a special session to honor him was there at Clio this year, and coming Photonics West, Joe House has arranged for a special session to pay tribute to him. We hope that events like today and the forthcoming events provide a forum for researchers to report on exciting new discoveries, which we are sure Peter would have cherished to attend and to contribute. Thank you.
So Peter was a mentor and a colleague for me, but in addition to that, in the context of research, I remember Peter in two specific ways. I just want to keep my 2 minutes. My interactions with him were mostly in the laboratory, and what I remember most fondly about was his scientific curiosity and his excitement of discovery. He was like a kid in the lab. And we always looked forward to working together in the lab, getting in there to do something cool. And we always came up with ideas. We in the hallways talked about brainstorming ideas, make a list of things to do. The list got longer and longer, and we never really got to the end of the list, but we did tackle a whole bunch of items off that list, and we had a lot of fun together in the lab. The other characteristics about Peter that stands out for me is his modesty. We all know Peter is a highly accomplished scientist. He's an academic and a researcher. He graduated from MIT and then Cornell. He's an intellectual, inventor, and he wrote 2 books. But he rarely ever spoke about his own accomplishments. He was not promoting himself. In fact, he was on the other end of the spectrum. He was very modest, and he often, to me, when we chat, he often refers to himself as, "I'm a chicken, you know, I don't push." That's how he saw himself. And the last point I want to make is how much he was part of UD's community. He was integral to the research community here at UD on all matters related to scholarship. Joe House talked about how Peter was respected by people from distant places. He was well known, and that is very true. But I also want to stress the fact that he was, in fact, respected even to a greater degree by people around us, nearby. Peter was not one of those who was only respected by people from a distance and not so much by nearby. In fact, he was much loved by the local community. I believe that comes from his character of modesty. He pursued science because he loved it. And the fame and the recognition came as a result, and he was not in pursuit of that. And I'm really glad that we're taking this opportunity to recognize Peter.
I'm probably one of Peter's newest collaborators. Been in biology department since 2009. I first started working with Peter, first met him when I was working in UDRI, and we were working on the IT cost proposal, the $28 million proposal that was funded through the Third Frontier, state of Ohio. It was a joy and a pleasure to work with Peter on that proposal. It was successful. We did a little bit of work on that together, talked about projects together, but it wasn't until I arrived in the biology department that I actually started collaborating heavily with Peter. Our collaboration actually sounds like the start of a good joke. Put a biologist, a physicist, and an engineer in a room. And what do you get? Harry says problems. No, we got inspiration. Joe House, Peter Powers, and I collaborated quite heavily on a tapered optical fiber sensor project on which we had 2 graduate students, an undergraduate physics major, Brandon King, from UD, as well as an electro-optics master's student and under Joe House's direction. It was an empirical study, and it was a theoretical study, and it was wildly successful, wildly synergistic, and we were like 3 kids in a room trying to come up with ideas. We would meet in SC64 down in the basement in the catacombs of Science Center, and when we walked out of that room, there was not a clear space on the whiteboards, because one of us would say, what about, and the next one would say, we could do, and the next one would say, oh my gosh, we have to do this. It was exhilarating. It was fun, and it was probably the most fun that I've had in my 20 years of interdisciplinary research. Our students have gone on, Igor Ida-Henry is now a PhD student, and Brandon King is now in medical school at Ohio University. So I would like to leave you with 3 words to describe Peter, and I think that you would agree with me. Scholar, gentleman, and friend.
I'd like to thank everyone who took some time this morning to reflect upon their relationship with Peter. Michael, thank you very much for helping out. Joe, Perry, Carolyn, Andrew, Partha, the remarks are just so right on. This is a gentleman who has left an impact at our institution and in our hearts, and we will always remember him. So let's give Peter a standing ovation.